He was a college speech teacher from a tiny town in Illinois. He had never stood in front of a movie camera. He was 32 years old, and the very first scene he ever filmed was so terrifying that state censor boards tried to ban it. Real-life gangsters started copying his wardrobe, and college fraternities formed fan clubs in his character's name. He pushed a wheelchair-bound old woman down a staircase while cackling like a lunatic, and audiences didn't know whether to scream or applaud. That single laugh earned him an Oscar nomination. That single laugh trapped him as Hollywood's most feared villain. And that single laugh launched a 50-year war against studios, against typecasting, against John Wayne himself. That would turn a giggling psychopath into what critics now call the most modern leading man of his entire generation. His name was Richard Widmark. He made over 70 films. He worked with John Ford, Elia Kazan, and Stanley Kramer. He invited Sidney Poitier to dinner when no one else in Hollywood would, and he guarded his private life so fiercely that when he died at 93, most of America had forgotten he existed. These are 10 moments that defined the extraordinary life of Richard Widmark. Let's begin. Number 1. The laugh that changed everything. Henry Hathaway is directing Kiss of Death for 20th Century Fox. The role of Tommy Udo, a giggling psychopathic hitman, was originally announced for Richard Conte. Hathaway didn't want Widmark at all. He looked at Widmark's high forehead and said the man looked too intellectual. He'd been considering Harry the hipster Gibson, a manic jive-talking pianist, for the part instead. But the production manager slipped Widmark's screen test upstairs to studio chief Daryl F. Zanuck. Zanuck took one look and ordered him cast immediately. For the audition, Widmark had dressed the part himself. Big brim fedora, black shirt, white tie, close cropped hairpiece to hide that forehead Hathaway hated. The role of Tommy Udo contains one of the most notorious scenes in cinema history. Udo visits the apartment of an informant's wheelchair-bound mother, played by Mildred Dunnock. He ties her to her wheelchair, and then he cackles gleefully as he pushes her down the stairwell to her death. Some state censor boards demanded the scene be eliminated entirely. Here's the part that nobody believes. That was the first scene Richard Widmark ever played for a movie camera. His very first moment on film was pushing an old woman down a flight of stairs while laughing like a maniac. The laugh was Widmark's own invention. It wasn't in the script. He threw it in. Where did it come from? His very first radio audition in 1938. He'd won the part by braying like a jackass into the microphone. 9 years later, that same unhinged cackle became the most terrifying sound in American cinema. He was reportedly a fan of Batman comics and modeled Udo partly on the Joker. Frank Gorshin later based his Riddler cackle on the 1960s Batman show directly on Widmark's Udo. The reaction was electric. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times wrote that Widmark was running away with all the acting honors. Variety called him the most shuddery menace of the year. Fox sent theaters wanted posters of his face, giving short shrift to the film's actual lead, Victor Mature. Widmark earned a Best Supporting Actor nomination at the 20th Academy Awards on March 20th, 1948. He lost to Edmund Gwenn for Miracle on 34th Street. He won the inaugural Golden Globe for New Star of the Year. It would remain his sole Oscar nomination across his entire career. Real-life gangster Crazy Joe Gallo styled his wardrobe after Tommy Udo. College fraternities formed Tommy Udo clubs. For years, people handed Widmark blank phonograph discs, begging him to record the laugh. And Widmark's own reaction to seeing himself on screen. He said he wanted to shoot himself. That damn laugh. For 2 years after that picture, you couldn't get me to smile. The Oscar nomination is documented. The Golden Globe is verified. The laugh was real. Number 2. He pushed the director on day 1, and Hathaway was a notorious bully. He screamed at actors, humiliated crew members, and he picked Widmark as his target from minute 1. He was at me all the time, Widmark recalled. Finally, he insulted me, and I said, "To hell with this," I quit, and I pushed him, and I walked off the set. A man who had never appeared in a single movie, first day on a Hollywood set, and he physically shoves the director and walks away. after a silent lunch brokered by Hathaway's assistant. The director left Widmark alone. As most bullies do, Widmark observed, when the time comes, they see that it doesn't work. His assessment of Hathaway was precise. Off the set, he was a charmer. On the set, he was Hitler. Despite that start, they made 5 more films together, and when Hathaway died in 1985, Richard Widmark served as a pallbearer at his funeral, and the man who shoved his director on day 1 carried his coffin at the end. The interviews are documented. The funeral records exist. The confrontation was real. Number 3, the farm boy who made $100,000 before Hollywood knew his name. Richard Widmark was born on December 26, 1914, in Sunrise Township, Chisago County, Minnesota. His father, Carl, was a traveling salesman of Swedish descent who dragged the family through South Dakota, Missouri, and half a dozen Illinois towns before settling in Princeton, Illinois. His mother, Ethel May Barr, was of English and Scottish stock. Richard had one brother, Donald, born in 1918. His grandmother started taking him to movies at age 3. He idolized Boris Karloff. At Princeton High School, he was senior class president, played football, and worked as a doorman at the local Apollo Theater, so he could watch movies for free. He enrolled at Lake Forest College in 1932 to study law. Then, he won the lead in a college play and realized that playing an attorney on stage was far more enticing than actually working as one. He switched to speech and drama. A classmate described him as a lone wolf who burned with ambition. His future wife, journalism student Jean Hazelwood, said the ambition that burned him up was irresistible. A guy like that, she said, is irresistible. After graduating in 1936, the college hired him to teach speech at $150 per month. He was terrible. He later said he was the world's lousiest teacher. Jean enrolled in his speech class, figuring he'd give her a good grade. The dean tried to shut the romance down. It didn't work. In the summer of 1937, the Widmark took a bicycle tour of Europe with a college friend. They filmed Hitler youth camps in Germany. Those memories would resurface decades later in one of the most important films ever made about Nazi crimes. In 1938, he followed Jean to New York and fell into radio. He originated the title role in Front Page Feral. He performed on The Shadow, Inner Sanctum Mysteries, Gangbusters, and Suspense. By the early 1940s, Widmark was pulling down $100,000 a year, over $2 million in today's money, and he hadn't appeared in a single film. He married Jean on April 5, 1942. Their daughter Anne was born in 1945. He made his Broadway debut in Kiss and Tell in 1943, which ran 956 performances. He appeared alongside Judy Holliday in Kiss Them For Me. He tried 3 times to enlist after Pearl Harbor, rejected every time for a perforated eardrum. Meanwhile, his brother Donald flew B-24 bombers over Europe, was shot down over the Netherlands in February 1944, and spent the rest of the war in a Nazi POW camp. Donald never recovered. He died in 1955 at 37. Widmark called it the most agonizing tragedy of his life. In 1946, a Fox talent scout spotted him in a touring play. Widmark signed a 7-year contract without telling his wife. At 32, with 0 film experience, he headed to Hollywood. The radio career is documented. The $100,000 salary is verified. The enlistment rejections were real. Number 4, he apologized to Sidney Poitier between every take. Joseph L. Mankiewicz is directing No Way Out. Widmark plays Ray Biddle, a virulently racist criminal who torments a young black intern. The intern is played by Sidney Poitier in his film debut. Widmark hated the role. It was horrible. He's such a terrible racist. But Mankiewicz talked him into it, and Zanuck would have put him on suspension if he'd refused. Here's what defines who Richard Widmark really was. Between every take, Widmark walked over to Poitier and apologized for the words he had to say. Every single time. The man who played the most terrifying villain in cinema couldn't bear to let his co-star think he meant those words. Then he did something no one in Hollywood was doing in 1950. He became the first person in the industry to invite Sidney Poitier to dinner at his home. 1950. Segregation was still the law across half the country. Hollywood smiled at black performers on set and ignored them everywhere else, and Richard Widmark opened his front door. When police stopped Poitier outside the house, Widmark walked outside and berated the officers. The two became lifelong friends. In 1989, when the National Board of Review gave Widmark their D.W. Griffith Lifetime Achievement Award, Poitier presented it. His words brought the room to silence. "For you, I would have walked." The film records exist. Poitier's testimony is documented. The friendship was real. Number 5. He became the literal face of film noir. Widmark spent 7 years at Fox fighting for roles that weren't villains. He played criminals in the street with no name, Roadhouse opposite Ida Lupino, and Yellow Sky opposite Gregory Peck. His first heroic lead came in Down to the Sea in Ships in 1949. Life magazine ran a spread headlined, "Widmark, the movie villain goes straight." Elia Kazan's Panic in the Streets in 1950 was the turning point. Kazan cast Widmark as a heroic public health officer and gave Jack Palance, as in his screen debut, the villain. Jules Dassin's Night and the City the same year gave him what many consider his finest performance, as Harry Fabian, a desperate hustler. Critic Eddie Mueller wrote that Widmark found tragedy at the core of a character. Here's the proof. When French critics published their landmark 1955 book Panorama du film noir américain, the definitive study that named the genre, they chose Widmark's face for the cover. Not Bogart, not Mitchum. Widmark. He was literally the face of film noir. Samuel Fuller's pickup on South Street in 1953 cemented him as a complex anti-hero. When FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover protested the unpatriotic character, Zanuck told Hoover he knew nothing about making movies. Fuller's assessment was definitive. He walks and talks like no one else. He could go either way. The film won the Bronze Lion at Venice and was selected for the National Film Registry in 2018. When Widmark refused to renew his contract in 1954, Zanuck retaliated by casting him with fourth billing. Widmark went independent anyway, formed Heath Productions, named after his daughter. The film noir cover is documented. The Hoover confrontation is verified. The rebellion was real. Number 6. He fought John Wayne and lost. John Wayne is directing The Alamo. Budget ballooned from $7.5 million to $12 million. Wayne originally wanted Widmark as Davy Crockett, but investors forced Wayne to play that role. Widmark was cast as Colonel Jim Bowie. The tension was immediate. Wayne called him Dick. Widmark icily corrected him. "It's Richard." The feud is often attributed to politics. Widmark, the liberal versus Wayne, the conservative. But Widmark said the real issue was Wayne's inability to motivate an actor for a scene. After Widmark repeatedly argued with Wayne in front of cast and crew, Wayne threw the smaller man against a wall. After that, Widmark never challenged Wayne's authority again. Their first meeting set the tone. At a party in 1947, Wayne was drinking and greeted Widmark with 7 words. "Well, here comes that laughing son of a bitch." The Alamo earned 7 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. The relationship never recovered. The production records exist. The confrontation is documented. The feud was real. Number 7. John Ford pitted him against Jimmy Stewart on purpose. On 2 Road. Together in 1961, Ford openly hated the material. So he found another way to entertain himself. He deliberately pitted Widmark and James Stewart against each other. Stewart later revealed it. He told me to watch out for Dick Widmark because he would start stealing scenes. Later, I learned he'd told Dick the same thing about me. He liked things to be tense. Despite Ford's games, Widmark claimed he had more fun on that film than any other. One famous sequence, a 4-minute unbroken 2-shot on a riverbank, required the crew to wade waist-deep into icy water all day. For Cheyenne Autumn in 1964, Ford's final western, Widmark himself had brought the project to Ford years earlier. When Ford sprained his ankle and became incapacitated from codeine, Widmark stepped in and directed scenes himself. The film lost $5.7 million, but has gained respect as Ford's attempt to atone for decades of one-dimensional Native American portrayals. Widmark appeared in approximately 19 westerns across his career and was inducted into the Western Performers Hall of Fame in 2002. His other notable westerns include Warlock in 1959 opposite Henry Fonda, which became the first of 5 collaborations, significant because both men would eventually marry the same woman. Widmark's assessment of Ford was blunt. "I loved Ford. He was a difficult little guy, but I caught him in his mellower years." The Stewart quotes are documented. The production records exist. The Ford games were real. Number 8, the bicycle tour that came back at Nuremberg. Remember that bicycle tour of Germany in the summer of 1937? The one where a 22-year-old speech teacher filmed Hitler youth camps? 24 years later, Stanley Kramer cast Widmark in judgment at Nuremberg as Colonel Tad Lawson, the American military prosecutor trying Nazi judges for crimes against humanity. The cast was extraordinary. Spencer Tracy, Burt Lancaster, Maximilian Schell, who won the Best Actor Oscar, Marlene Dietrich, Judy Garland, Montgomery Clift, and Widmark, the man who had seen the Hitler Youth with his own eyes, now prosecuting their leaders on film. Variety praised his characterization. The film received 11 Oscar nominations and won 2. It remains one of the most important American films about justice ever made. Widmark wasn't just acting, he was remembering. The bicycle tour is documented. The casting is verified. The connection was real. Number 9. The detective who predicted Dirty Harry. Don Siegel directs Madigan. Widmark plays Daniel Madigan, a tough, flawed NYPD detective, given 72 hours to recapture a suspect. Henry Fonda co-stars as a morally rigid police commissioner. The character of Madigan, a rule-breaking cop in moral gray areas, directly prefigured Dirty Harry 3 years later. Same director, Don Siegel, same template. Richard Widmark built the blueprint that Clint Eastwood made famous. During location shooting, Widmark and co-star Harry Guardino's car was attacked by a gang in Harlem. The danger was real, even off camera. Widmark called Siegel one of the 3 best directors he ever worked with, alongside Kazan and Ford. He's efficient, organized, quiet, and in total command. The character died at the film's end, but Widmark resurrected Madigan for a 1972 NBC television series. He also produced The Bedford Incident in 1965, a Cold War thriller opposite Sidney Poitier, and Time Limit in 1957, directed by Carl Malden. The Dirty Harry connection is documented. The blueprint was real. Number 10. 55 years, 1 marriage, and a man who refused to smile for 2 years. Richard Widmark's 55-year marriage to Jean Hazelwood was the bedrock of his entire life. He told the New York Times he had never been unfaithful because he happened to like his wife a lot. They lived on a horse ranch in Hidden Valley, California, and a farm in Roxbury, Connecticut. He owned a cattle ranch in Missouri, where he funded a local airport that still bears his name, Widmark Airport, FAA code MO83. Off-screen, he was the opposite of Tommy Udo. Time magazine called him a gentleman of the old school. He refused talk shows. I think a performer should do his work and then shut up. When I see people destroying their privacy by beaming it out to millions of viewers, I think it cheapens them as individuals. The confusion between Widmark and his characters was sometimes violent. Women hit him with purses on the street. A man in Texas knocked him down. He went fishing and felt guilty about catching a trout. A lifelong liberal Democrat. He championed gun control. I know I've made kind of a half-assed career out of violence, but I abhor violence. On the Hollywood blacklist, he was furious. Those idiots. The worst period in American history. A period we should be very ashamed of. He and Jean created the Jean and Richard Widmark Foundation, funding Alzheimer's research and environmental conservation. When Jean developed Alzheimer's, Widmark became her caretaker. She died March 2nd, 1997. 2 years later, he married Susan Blanchard, stepdaughter of Oscar Hammerstein II and former wife of Henry Fonda, a friend for 30 years. His later career included Murder on the Orient Express in 1974 and the acclaimed TV movie Cold Sassy Tree with Faye Dunaway in 1989. He explained retirement with typical directness. I've got a few more years to live, and I don't want to spend them sitting around a movie set for 12 hours to do 2 minutes of film on modern Hollywood. The businessmen who run Hollywood today have no self-respect. Look at Forrest Gump, a hymn to stupidity. In 2001, Lincoln Center held a 16-film retrospective. Widmark attended at 87, sharp as a tack. When asked about missed opportunities, he said he wished he'd worked with Hitchcock. Yeah, I fancied myself as Cary Grant. When screenwriter William Goldman invited him to read for Marathon Man, Widmark arrived punctually and said, "Thank you for seeing me. Wow, I know you want Larry for the part. I hope he plays it." His awards include the inaugural Golden Globe in 1948, a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame at 6800 Hollywood Boulevard, the D.W. Griffith Lifetime Achievement Award, presented by Sidney Poitier, an honorary doctorate from Lake Forest College. 3 of his films are in the National Film Registry. Richard Widmark died on March 24, 2008, at his farmhouse in Roxbury, Connecticut. He was 93, buried in a private service. No fanfare, no cameras, exactly the way he would have wanted it. Stephen King referenced Tommy Udo in The Green Mile. Navy SEALs cited the Frogmen as the reason they joined the service. Kent Jones of Film Comment captured what made Widmark essential. At the heart of many Widmark performances is a disappointed child within. Not a bad intuition about American manhood, and Widmark kept it simpler. I suppose I wanted to act in order to have a place in the sun. I'd always lived in small towns, and acting meant having some kind of identity. The boy from Sunrise Township found that identity, and then he spent 50 years making sure the laughing psychopath didn't consume it entirely. Which moment hit you hardest? The laugh that terrorized audiences and haunted Widmark for 2 years? The apology to Sidney Poitier between every take? John Wayne throwing him against a wall? The 55-year marriage to the woman from his speech class? If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. It means the world to us. And let us know in the comments which old Hollywood legend we should cover next. We're listening. Thanks for watching. More stories coming soon.